A billionaire woman stopped in shock. A poor man slept on a bench, holding his little girl close against the cold. Tears filled her eyes. She had no idea this moment would change her life forever. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The city was still half asleep when Isabella Hart's car rolled quietly down the empty street. The glass towers that usually shimmered with life were dim and distant, like sleeping giants. She sat in the back seat, her gaze lost somewhere beyond the window, where dawn's faint light touched the edges of the skyline. Her phone buzzed with unread messages, but she ignored them all. For years, Isabella had been called many things. The Iron Woman of business, the youngest billionaire in the city, a genius with no weakness. Yet that morning, none of those titles comforted her. There was a heaviness inside her chest that no success could silence. She had built her empire from dust and discipline, learning early that emotions were distractions. But lately, the emptiness inside her mansion had grown louder. The echo of her heels across marble floors felt like reminders that she was walking alone. That morning, she told her driver, "Just drive anywhere." He nodded, confused but obedient, and steered toward the old park on the city's edge, a place long forgotten by the rich. The air was cold, painted with the scent of rain that had fallen overnight. Trees whispered quietly in the soft wind. Isabella stepped out of the car, pulling her long coat tighter. The silence was different here, real, unfiltered. She began walking slowly along the path, her heels crunching against the wet gravel, when something caught her attention near a rusted bench under a flickering street lamp. There, curled up against the cold, was a man, his body hunched protectively around a small girl. His jacket, torn at the seams, was wrapped around her tiny frame, shielding her from the morning chill. The girl couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Her hair, tangled yet soft, rested against his chest as her small hand gripped his shirt tightly, as if afraid the world might take him away. Isabella stopped. For a moment, she simply stared. Her world and his couldn't have been more different. She had more rooms than she could count, closets filled with clothes she'd never wear twice, and a team of people who existed to make her life easier. And yet here, on a forgotten park bench, she saw something she hadn't seen in years. Warmth. Real, unpretending warmth. Her driver spoke softly. "Ma'am, shall we go?" "It isn't safe here," but Isabella didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the man's face, rugged, tired, unshaven, and yet peaceful, like someone who had fought too many battles and accepted defeat with quiet grace. The little girl stirred slightly, and Isabella instinctively stepped forward, afraid the cold might harm her. She pulled off her wool scarf and draped it gently over the sleeping pair. For a moment she stood there, unsure what she was feeling. Pity. No, it was something deeper, something that shook the carefully built walls around her heart. She whispered to herself, "How does someone with nothing still look this whole?" The man shifted slightly but didn't wake. His arm tightened around the child, a protective reflex that pierced straight through Isabella's composure. She backed away slowly, not wanting to disturb them, but her thoughts refused to let go. Even as her driver opened the car door, her eyes kept drifting back to that bench, to the sight of a father's love. Raw and unguarded, stronger than the cold around them. Back inside the car, Isabella tried to distract herself. She opened her tablet, skimmed through the latest reports, and even tried replying to emails. But every time she blinked, she saw that image again, the man's trembling hands shielding his daughter, the torn jacket that became her blanket, the faint smile on the girl's lips as she dreamed in her father's arms. It haunted her like a reflection she didn't understand. When she returned to her mansion, the marble halls seemed colder than usual. The walls looked taller, emptier. Her assistant greeted her, asking about a pending investor meeting, but Isabella's mind was elsewhere. She walked past him without a word, straight to her private study, and stared out of the window. Outside, the morning sun bathed the city in gold, the same sun that now warmed that little girl on the park bench. Hours passed before curiosity turned into action. Isabella called her driver. "Find out who that man is. The one from the park," he hesitated. "The one with the child, ma'am?" "Yes, him. I want to know everything." By evening, the driver returned with quiet hesitation. "His name's Ethan Cole," he said carefully. "He used to work for one of your subsidiary companies 3 years ago. Maintenance department. His wife passed away last year. He couldn't keep up with rent. The company let him go when he missed a few days of work to care for his daughter." Isabella's chest tightened. "Which company?" "Orion Tech, ma'am." "Under your holdings?" Her breath caught. She had signed hundreds of papers, authorized dozens of layoffs during the pandemic, and never looked twice at the names. "He worked for me," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "And now he sleeps on a bench. That night the mansion's lights stayed dim." Isabella sat at her piano, something she hadn't touched in years, and let her fingers rest on the keys. The melody that once brought her comfort now felt hollow. She remembered her father's voice, long gone but still echoing in memory. "Never let your heart rule your mind, Isabella. Feelings make you weak." She had followed that advice all her life. But tonight, as she pictured the sleeping father and daughter, she wondered if weakness was really what she'd been avoiding, or humanity itself. Sleep refused to come. Her thoughts spun like restless shadows. She imagined how it must feel to hold a child so close, to be their only shelter in the world, to lose everything, yet still fight for someone else's smile. She looked around her room, the silk sheets, the chandeliers, the walls lined with art worth more than most people earned in a lifetime, and felt something she hadn't felt before. Shame. By dawn, she made up her mind. "Drive me to the park," she told her chauffeur. The streets were quiet again, the city still wiping the sleep from its eyes. But when they reached the park, the bench was empty. Only her scarf remained, folded neatly on the wooden seat. A chill ran through her as she picked it up. There was a faint imprint of where they had been, like a memory the world had decided to keep. She looked around, scanning the paths, hoping to catch sight of them. Nothing. The park felt emptier now than it had the day before. She clutched the scarf tightly, the faint scent of smoke and rain still clinging to it, and whispered, "Where did you go?" That question followed her through the day. She tried to focus on meetings, reports, numbers, all the things that usually defined her. But none of it mattered. The world she had built felt fragile, meaningless. Every face she saw reminded her of someone she might have ignored. Someone like Ethan. That evening, as she sat by her window again, watching people rush home through the busy streets below, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from her driver. "Ma'am, I found them. They're staying at the old community shelter near Harbor Street." Isabella's heart skipped. She grabbed her coat, ignoring the calls from her assistant, and rushed out the door. The car sped through the city, lights blurring past, until they reached the shelter, a crumbling building hidden behind cracked walls. She stepped out quietly, her heels sinking into the muddy ground. Through a dusty window she saw them. Ethan sat on a worn-out cot, repairing a torn shoe with a thread and needle. Lily sat beside him, humming softly as she colored on an old piece of cardboard. The flickering bulb above them cast a soft light across their faces. They looked tired but safe. Together, Isabella's throat tightened. The warmth between them filled that small, broken space with more love than her entire mansion ever held. She wanted to walk in, to offer help, to say something, anything, but her voice refused to form. She simply stood there, a silent witness to something pure. For a long time she watched as Ethan finished repairing the shoe, kissed his daughter's forehead, and whispered something that made her giggle. The sound reached Isabella through the glass like a melody she'd forgotten how to hear. When she finally turned to leave, her driver asked, "Should I call the company to arrange assistance for them, ma'am?" She shook her head slowly. "No, not yet. I need to understand them first. Really understand." That night she returned home, but her heart stayed behind, in that shelter with the father who had nothing and the child who had everything that mattered. For the first time in her life, Isabella Hart, The billionaire who owned everything realized she had never truly seen what love looked like. And as the city lights flickered outside her window, she whispered to herself, maybe the richest hearts aren't found in mansions after all. The next morning, the sun rose over the city with a golden calm that did little to quiet Isabella's restless heart. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that flickering light in the shelter, the man's quiet patience, the little girl's laughter echoing through cracked walls. She tried to convince herself that her interest was logical, maybe guilt, maybe curiosity, but deep inside, she knew it was something else. Something she couldn't yet name. She dressed simply that morning. No jewelry, no designer suit, just a plain blouse and jeans. Her driver looked startled when she stepped outside. "We're going to Harbor Street again," she said. "And this time, don't follow me in." The shelter was busier than before. Volunteers moved in and out, handing out food, blankets, small comforts that seemed to mean everything here. Isabella paused near the doorway, watching. Ethan was there again, helping an old man fix a broken chair, even though his hands looked worn and blistered. Lily was sitting nearby, playing with two younger children, her laughter cutting through the heaviness of the place like sunlight through clouds. For a moment, Isabella just stood there unnoticed, taking it in. The billionaire inside her, the woman trained to see value only in numbers and profit, felt strangely small. There was a grace in the way Ethan worked, in the quiet dignity of his movements. When the chair was finally fixed, the old man thanked him with a trembling smile. Ethan nodded humbly, wiping his hands on his torn jeans. That was when Lily noticed Isabella standing by the door. "Daddy!" she said, pointing. "It's the scarf lady." Ethan turned, surprised. His expression shifted quickly, confusion, recognition, and then unease. He stood up, instinctively pulling his daughter a little closer. "Miss Hart?" he said cautiously, as if unsure if he should even say her name. Isabella smiled gently. "You remember me?" He nodded. Hard to forget someone who drops scarves on sleeping strangers. His voice carried humor, but behind it was pride, the kind that poverty couldn't take away. Isabella stepped closer. "I came to see how you're doing." "We're fine," he said quickly. "A roof, food, a few jobs here and there. We manage." Lily tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, she's nice. She gave us the soft scarf." Ethan looked down at her, then back at Isabella. "She's kind, Lily, but we don't take what we can't earn." Isabella hesitated. "And if I told you I could offer you work?" she asked softly. He frowned. "Doing what?" "Maintenance," she said. "One of my companies needs help. It's honest work. I'd like you to take it." He studied her carefully. "Because you feel sorry for me?" "Because I believe you deserve a chance," she replied. There was silence between them for a long moment. Finally, Ethan said, "I'll take it. If you promise not to treat me like a project." "I promise," Isabella said quietly. "And your daughter, I'll make sure she's taken care of too." Ethan smiled faintly. "She's tougher than she looks." Lily, unaware of the depth in their exchange, grinned and asked, "Can we have pancakes tomorrow, Daddy?" He chuckled softly. "If I get this job, kiddo, we'll have a whole mountain of them." That moment, small and fleeting, stayed with Isabella all day. By evening, the paperwork was ready, but she made one change no one in her office expected. She removed her own name from the employee record. Ethan would never know who had truly hired him. She wanted to see him rise without feeling indebted. When Ethan arrived at the company the next morning, dressed in clean but worn clothes, the staff barely noticed him. Just another worker, another name on the maintenance roster. But Isabella watched quietly from her glass office window as he moved through the halls, fixing what others ignored, helping where no one asked. His work wasn't perfect, but it was honest. There was care in everything he touched. Even the janitor, who'd worked there for 20 years, whispered, "That new guy works like he owns the place." Days turned into weeks. Isabella found reasons to visit the maintenance floor more often. Sometimes she'd bring extra tools, pretending to inspect the building. Other times, she'd just watch from afar, noticing how Ethan's presence changed the air around him. He had a way of making people better, without even trying. One afternoon, she saw him helping a young intern fix a stuck elevator door. "Sometimes it's not the machine," he said, tapping the control panel gently. "Sometimes it just needs a little patience." The intern laughed, thinking it was a joke, but Isabella caught the truth behind the words. Patience, something she had long forgotten how to have. That evening, as the workers left, she walked toward him. "How's the first week treating you?" she asked casually. He smiled. "Hard work feels good. It's been a while since I've been this tired for the right reasons." She nodded, then hesitated. "Would you join me for dinner? You and Lily, nothing formal, just a meal." He looked unsure. "That's kind, but it's just dinner," she interrupted gently. "No business, no charity, just people." He studied her face for a moment, as if searching for any hidden motive. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, Lily will be thrilled. She thinks you're some kind of fairy." That night, they met at a small cafe tucked away from the city's glamour, Ethan in his cleanest shirt, Lily clutching his hand, her eyes wide with excitement. Isabella arrived quietly, without her usual entourage, and for once, without her armor of power. She ordered pancakes for Lily, coffee for herself, and they began to talk, not about business, not about wealth, but about small things. Lily's favorite color. The stories Ethan used to tell her before bed. The way the rain always made the world feel new. "You know," Ethan said at one point, "when you lose everything, you start to see how much you really had. My wife used to say we were rich, not in money but in love. I didn't understand that until now." Isabella looked down, her fingers tracing the edge of her cup. "I don't think I've ever been rich in that way," she admitted softly. Lily leaned forward, smiling. "That's okay. You can learn. Daddy says love's like music. You just have to listen for it." Her innocent words pierced through Isabella's guarded heart. She smiled faintly, her voice trembling as she said, "Your daddy's a wise man." Ethan laughed quietly, maybe once in a while. The rest of the evening passed in gentle laughter. When it was time to leave, Lily hugged Isabella tightly. "Thank you for dinner," she said. "You have kind eyes." As Isabella walked them to the car, something about the way the streetlight hit them, Ethan's tired smile, Lily's sleepy head resting on his shoulder, made her feel like she was watching a moment she didn't want to end. For the first time in years, she didn't want to return to her mansion. She wanted to follow them home, to stay in that warmth that didn't depend on walls or wealth. Later that night, as rain began to fall again, Isabella sat by her window, replaying every word in her mind. But just as she began to feel peace for the first time in a long while, her phone rang. It was her driver, his voice tense. "Ma'am, I just got word from the shelter. They didn't return tonight." "What do you mean they didn't return?" she asked, her voice tightening. "They left earlier this evening." "And no one's seen them since?" Isabella's chest went cold. She stood up, heart pounding. Outside, the rain turned heavier, the city glowing with lightning flashes. "Find them," she said, grabbing her coat. "Now!" The car sped through the streets again, wipers struggling against the downpour. Isabella's eyes scanned every alley, every shadow. And then, through the sheets of rain, she saw it. The same old park, the same rusted bench. And there, under the dim streetlight, were Ethan and Lily, huddled close together again. Shivering, the driver slowed down. But Isabella was already stepping out into the storm, her clothes instantly soaked. She ran toward them, heart breaking at the sight. Lily's small body trembled in her father's arms. Ethan looked up, startled. "Miss Hart? What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," she said, her voice shaking. "Why are you out here?" "The shelter flooded," he said simply. "We didn't want to bother anyone." "Bother?" Isabella cut herself off. She dropped her umbrella, kneeling beside them. "You're coming with me." "Both of you," Ethan hesitated. "We'll dry off." "It's fine." "No," she said firmly. "Not tonight." For the first time in her life, Isabella didn't care about appearances, headlines, or what people would think. She extended her hand, trembling, cold, but sincere. Ethan looked at it for a long moment, then finally took it. As she helped them into the car, Lily's head rested against her shoulder, her tiny hand clutching Isabella's sleeve. and as the car drove away through the storm, Isabella stared out the window, rain streaking down like tears she hadn't realized she was shedding. Something deep inside her had shifted. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for certain. She could never go back to the person she was before that night. The morning came with a quiet heaviness. The storm had passed, but its traces lingered everywhere, damp streets, broken branches, and puddles reflecting the grey clouds above. Inside Isabella's mansion, a fire burned softly in the fireplace. The faint scent of rain still clung to the air, mixing with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Ethan sat on the edge of the guest bed, his clothes now clean and dry. He glanced around the room, the soft cream walls, the shelves lined with books, the elegant curtains that swayed with the morning breeze. It was a world far removed from the shelter, and he felt like an intruder in it. Lily, however, was mesmerized. She sat cross-legged on the large rug, her little hands exploring a set of colored pencils Isabella had given her. "This place feels like a dream," Lily said softly. Her voice filled with wonder. Ethan smiled faintly. "It's not our home, sweetheart. Just a kind lady helping us. But Daddy," she said, tilting her head, "dreams can be real for a little while, right?" He sighed. "Maybe just for a little while." At that moment, Isabella entered, holding a tray. "Breakfast," she announced gently. "I didn't know what you liked, so I made a bit of everything." The table was filled with pancakes, fruit, eggs, and warm bread, simple things yet made with such care. Ethan rose immediately. "You didn't have to go through all this trouble." "It's no trouble," Isabella said, setting the tray down. "You both needed a proper meal." Lily grinned and clapped her hands. "Pancakes again!" Ethan chuckled. "Looks like you're spoiling her already." Isabella smiled. "She deserves it." For a while, the room was filled only with the sound of clinking forks and small laughter. It was an odd kind of peace, delicate, fragile, but real. Ethan noticed how natural Isabella looked in that moment, away from her corporate armor. She laughed easily, her eyes softening every time Lily spoke. After breakfast, Isabella walked to the window, her voice quiet. "You can stay here until you find somewhere safe. I'll arrange something temporary." Ethan stood up. "I appreciate that, but I'll find a place soon. I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing," she said quickly. "I asked you to come. It's my decision." Their eyes met, a brief unspoken exchange of pride, gratitude, and something neither could yet name. Then Lily interrupted, holding up a drawing. "Look, it's all of us. Me, Daddy, and Miss Bella." Isabella turned, startled. "Miss Bella!" Lily nodded. "That's what I'm going to call you." "You look like a Bella." Ethan laughed softly. "You've been renamed." Isabella smiled, and a real unguarded smile. "Then Bella it is." Over the next few days, life in the mansion began to change. The silence that once haunted its halls was replaced by small sounds, Lily's giggles echoing down the corridor, Ethan's quiet humming while fixing the garden lights, the occasional clatter of breakfast dishes in the kitchen. The staff, at first shocked by Isabella's guests, grew fond of them. Even the old butler, Mr. Hargreaves, who had served her family for decades, couldn't help but smile when Lily offered him a flower from the garden. "You've brought colour back to this house," he told Isabella one afternoon, as she watched them play outside. "Maybe it was missing colour for too long," she said softly, yet beneath the warmth there lingered a quiet tension, something unspoken between her and Ethan. He was polite, kind, always keeping his distance as if afraid of overstepping. She, on the other hand, found herself looking for reasons to cross paths with him. A question here, a conversation there, anything that allowed her to hear that calm, grounded voice that seemed to steady her world. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Isabella found Ethan standing in the garden, looking up at the twilight sky. "You fix more than lights out here," she said from behind him. He turned slightly, smiling. "Just trying to make the dark a little less dark." She stepped closer. "You've done more than that." He looked at her, and for a moment neither spoke. The air was heavy with something tender, something real. Finally he said quietly, "You don't have to do all this, Isabella. The house, the job, the food, you don't owe me anything." "I know," she replied. But maybe I need to do it, not for you, but for me. He frowned slightly. For you? Yes, she said. Because somewhere along the way, I forgot what being human felt like. And you reminded me. Ethan lowered his gaze, unsure how to respond. I'm just a man trying to keep his daughter safe, and I'm just a woman trying to learn what matters, she whispered. A soft wind brushed between them, carrying with it the faint scent of jasmine. For a heartbeat, it felt like the world had gone still. But before anything more could be said, a voice called from the doorway, Mr. Hargreaves, clearing his throat politely. Miss Hart, there's a call from your office. They say it's urgent. Reality returned, breaking the fragile moment. Isabella nodded, forcing a smile. I'll be right there. Ethan watched her go, the faint echo of her heels fading into the house. When she disappeared from view, he exhaled, eyes drifting back to the sky. He didn't understand what was happening, only that his heart hadn't felt this conflicted in years. That night, Isabella sat in her study, staring at the phone long after the call had ended. It was her board, furious about her absences, demanding explanations. You've changed, one of them had said sharply. You used to be ruthless, focused. What happened to that? She had no answer. When she finally left the study, the house was silent. She walked toward the guest wing and paused by the half-open door. Inside, Ethan was asleep in a chair, his head tilted, exhaustion etched into his features. Lily lay curled up under the blanket, her tiny hand resting on his arm. Isabella stepped closer, her heart tightening. In that dim light, they looked like everything she had never known she needed. Warmth, love, belonging. She wanted to reach out, to touch that peace, but she knew it wasn't hers to claim. Not yet. The next morning, Ethan told her he'd found a small apartment near the workshop. It's nothing fancy, he said, but it's ours. She tried to smile. That's wonderful, but something in her voice betrayed her. You don't sound happy about it, he said gently. I am, she insisted. Really, I am. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Thank you, Isabella, for everything. When they left that afternoon, the house felt emptier than ever. Every sound echoed too loudly. Even the sunlight seemed duller. Mr. Hargreaves found her standing by the window again, staring out at the driveway. They were good for you, he said quietly. Yes, she whispered. And now they're gone. But fate, as it often does, wasn't finished with them yet. A week later, Isabella was in her office when her secretary rushed in, pale and breathless. Miss Hart, she said, there's been an accident. Isabella's heart dropped. What kind of accident? It's Mr. Ethan Cole and his daughter. For a second, the world stopped moving. The room blurred around her as her pulse thundered in her ears. Where? She whispered. At the construction site. They said a beam collapsed. Before the woman could finish, Isabella was already running, her heels echoing against the marble floors, her heart pounding like a drum. She didn't wait for her car. She didn't wait for an escort. She only knew one thing. She couldn't lose them. Not now. Not when she'd just begun to feel alive again. The hospital corridors smelled of antiseptic and fear. Isabella's heels echoed sharply as she ran through the hallway, her breath ragged, her heart beating faster than it ever had before. Every nurse she passed turned to look, but none stopped her. They could see the desperation in her eyes. Ethan Cole, she said breathlessly at the reception desk. He was in an accident. Where is he? The nurse hesitated, glancing at the chart. Room 307. He's in surgery. His daughter's in the children's ward. Stable, but shaken. Isabella didn't wait to hear more. She hurried toward the ward, her hands trembling as she pushed open the door. Lily sat on a hospital bed, her small legs dangling, a teddy bear clutched tightly in her arms. There was a bruise on her forehead and a bandage on her knee, but her eyes lit up the moment she saw Isabella. "Miss Bella!" she cried softly, reaching out. Isabella knelt beside her, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "Hey, sweetheart, you're safe now. I'm here." The child's voice wavered. "Daddy pushed me away when the big thing fell. He said it was going to be okay." Tears welled up in Isabella's eyes, but she blinked them back. "He's so brave," she whispered, "and he's going to be okay too. I promise." She didn't know if that was true, but in that moment, Lily needed hope more than honesty. Hours passed, like slow, torturous minutes. Isabella sat in the waiting area outside the operating room, her mind replaying every memory. The way Ethan smiled when Lily laughed, the calm in his voice when he spoke, the quiet strength in his eyes. Finally, the door opened. The surgeon stepped out, his expression unreadable. "Doctor," Isabella asked, her voice trembling. "He's alive," the doctor said, "but it was close. A steel beam struck his shoulder and ribs. He lost a lot of blood. The next 24 hours will be critical." Isabella exhaled shakily, covering her mouth as relief and terror clashed within her. "Can I see him?" The doctor hesitated, then nodded. Only for a moment. She walked into the recovery room, the steady beep of machines filling the silence. Ethan lay on the bed, pale and motionless, tubes and wires attached to him. His face was peaceful, almost too peaceful. Isabella pulled a chair beside him, her hand trembling as she reached for his. "You promised Lily she'd be okay," she whispered. "Now you keep that promise, Ethan. You hear me? You don't get to just leave." Her voice cracked, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "You came into my life and turned everything upside down. You taught me what kindness feels like. You showed me what it means to be human again." She squeezed his hand tighter. "So please, don't you dare give up now." She stayed there until morning, refusing to leave his side. Every hour felt endless, every beep of the monitor like a heartbeat of hope. When dawn broke, the first rays of light touched his face, and then miraculously he stirred. His fingers twitched beneath hers. "Ethan," she whispered, leaning closer. His eyelids fluttered open, his gaze finding hers. "You stayed," he murmured weakly. "Of course I stayed," she said, her voice trembling with relief. "You think I'd let you face this alone?" He smiled faintly. "You shouldn't have. I didn't want to be another burden." She shook her head. "You're not a burden, Ethan. You're the reason I wake up and feel something real." He tried to speak again, but his voice was too soft. Isabella placed her hand gently against his cheek. "Don't talk. Just rest. Lily's fine. She's waiting for you." For the first time, Ethan's eyes glistened. "Thank God," he whispered, before sleep claimed him again. Over the next few weeks, Isabella visited daily. She brought books for Ethan, sketch pads for Lily, and sometimes just herself, because they didn't need much else. The sterile, white walls of the hospital slowly became a place of laughter, shared stories, and quiet strength. One afternoon, as the sun painted golden streaks through the blinds, Ethan looked at her and said softly, "You don't belong in a place like this every day." She smiled. "Maybe I do. Maybe this is where I finally found something that matters." He gazed at her, eyes filled with gratitude. "You've done more for me and Lily than anyone ever has. And you've done more for me than you'll ever realize," she replied. When he was finally discharged, Isabella offered to drive them home. But as the car pulled up in front of their tiny apartment, Ethan hesitated. "Isabella," he said quietly, "I can't keep taking. I need to stand on my own. For Lily, for me." She nodded slowly. "I understand." But when he turned to go, she added, "Just promise me something." He looked back. "What's that?" "If you ever fall again, if life gets too heavy, don't disappear. Don't walk away like the rain washes everything clean. Let someone find you this time." He smiled softly. "I'll try." She wanted to tell him everything then, the feelings she had tried to hide, the ache she felt every time he wasn't near. But the words caught in her throat. Instead, she just watched him walk away, Lily's small hand in his. Months passed. Life went on, but something was missing. The mansion was beautiful again, yet it felt hollow. The board was pleased with her renewed focus, but her heart wasn't in the work. One rainy evening, she found herself driving aimlessly. The city lights blurred through the windshield, mirroring the tears she refused to shed. Without realizing it, she ended up near Harbour Street, the place where it had all begun. The shelter was nearly empty now, rebuilt after the flood. And there, under the flickering light by the door, stood Ethan, holding a box of donated clothes, his shoulders stronger, his eyes brighter. He looked up, startled, then smiled. "I thought you'd forgotten this place." "I couldn't," she said softly. "It's where I found you." "And I found myself," he replied. For a moment they stood in silence, two souls who had crossed oceans of pain and pride to meet in the same place again. Then Lily ran out of the shelter waving excitedly. "Miss Bella, Daddy said we're helping rebuild the playroom. You want to help too?" Isabella laughed through her tears. "I'd love to." As they worked side by side, the rain began to fall again, soft, rhythmic, cleansing. But this time it didn't feel like sorrow. It felt like renewal. When the last of the toys were stacked and the lights turned off, Ethan walked her to her car. "You know," he said quietly, "you don't need to fix everything to be kind. Sometimes just showing up is enough." She looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Then I'll keep showing up." He smiled, and before she could say another word, he reached out and took her hand. In that simple gesture, warm, real, and wordless, everything that had been broken finally began to heal. The city lights flickered in the puddles, the night alive with quiet hope. For the first time, neither of them felt lost, because sometimes the people you find in the storm are the ones who were meant to lead you home.